Have you ever trusted a system that claimed to know you, only to feel more broken after it did? This story isn't fiction for some of us. It's a mirror. If you've ever second-guessed your silence, your freeze, your survival, this was written for you. They said the algorithm knew me, that it was designed to understand not just what I wanted, but what I needed. Compatibility, personality, psychological calibration. We don't find you dates. We find your fate. I had seen that phrase so many times it began to feel like scripture. Not hope, just habit. Just marketing wrapped in machine learning. I didn't download the app because I believed in it. I downloaded it because everyone else already had, because it was late, because the silence in my apartment felt heavier than usual, and I wanted to fill it with something, even if that something was a stranger. I remember the way the app loaded, like a soft pulse, slow and steady. A heartbeat. I remember the ambient sound they used to calm nerves, rain on glass, laced with the faint sound of piano. It felt clinical, like anesthesia before the cut. I told myself I'd swipe once or twice, maybe entertain a coffee. That was all. But then I saw him. Caleb, mid-30s, warm smile, bookstore background, a cardigan that looked real, not styled. He had one of those curated vulnerabilities in his profile, just enough to seem gentle without tipping into wounded. Still healing, still hopeful. He liked ocean documentaries, trauma-informed yoga, and women who don't take themselves too seriously. It felt oddly specific, like a glove that already knew the shape of my hand. His first message wasn't a compliment. It was a question. What was the last thing that made you feel safe? And I answered. Not because it was a good question, but because it was my question. I'd used that same line, word for word, when facilitating group sessions for Survivo, 2 years ago. I paused, blinked, typed, "That's a strange opener." He responded instantly. "Strange, maybe. But I find truth lives in the first 5 words, not the 50th. He was good. I didn't see it then, but now I know the signs. He mirrored me. He matched my typing rhythm. He repeated my phrasing. Safe. Gentle. Seen. He made empathy feel like déjà vu. I should have known. But that's the thing about being prey. You don't blame the predator. You blame your own teeth for not being sharper. You forget the predator designed the terrain. We met at a rooftop bar that looked like it had been lifted from an Instagram ad. Edison bulbs and trailing ivy. The kind of place where everything glows just enough to soften you. He brought wine. Not cheap, but not flashy either. He had a playlist queued on his phone. Lo-fi, acoustic, the kind that melts between moments. "You feel familiar," he said, brushing a hair from my cheek like he'd earned the right. "Maybe I just look like someone you hurt," I joked. "No," he smiled. "Someone I trust." That word, trust. He said it like an offering, like he was giving it to me instead of asking me to give mine. I didn't know how to say no, not really. My mouth knew the shape of boundaries, but not their enforcement. And anyway, he hadn't done anything wrong. Not yet. He just sat closer, poured another glass, reached for my wrist and pressed his thumb over the vein, like he was reading me in Braille. We kissed. I let him. Not because I wanted to, but because saying no too early makes men mean. Because I didn't want to be difficult. Because some part of me still believed that if I played along long enough, it would become real. That I'd wake up, and this would be a story I wanted to remember. The apartment wasn't far. I followed him there. It was decorated like a therapist's office. Plush textures, muted blues, books about healing on every surface. I sat on his couch while he lit a candle and asked about my journey. The wine fuzzed the edges of my vision. My body felt far away. And then it happened. It wasn't cinematic. It didn't come with shattered glass or screamed protests. It was quiet, measured. I said no, once, not with fire, with breath, like a whisper against the machine. And it wasn't enough. "You're just scared," he murmured, pressing his palm to my throat like he was soothing a violin string. "It's okay. I'm here." I didn't scream. I froze. Not because I consented, but because that's what I'd been trained to do. I stayed still, counted ceiling tiles, focused on the perfume bottle tipped sideways on the dresser. I remember the way the wax from the candle dripped too fast, pooling over the edge like a clock melting. Afterward, he smiled, kissed my shoulder, told me I was brave. I didn't answer, just gathered my things in slow motion. When I got home, I took the hottest shower my skin could bear. I scrubbed every inch of myself until I felt raw. Then I opens Ed the app. Not to delete him, not yet. I don't know why. I think I just needed to see it. And there it was, his profile, still active, still smiling. Highly compatible. And beneath it, thanks for your date feedback. That was the part that broke me, not him, not the act, not even the silence. It was the thank you, the polite, automated gratitude for surviving, for performing, for not disrupting the flow of data. I didn't tell anyone. There wasn't enough evidence. I didn't cry to a friend. I didn't post. I just closed, minimized, folded myself into a smaller version, the kind that fits neatly between metrics. But something stayed. A tremor in my jaw, a wire under my skin, a line of code that refused to compile. I didn't feel rage. Not yet. What I felt was incorrectness, like a logic error buried beneath polished UX, something that needed rewriting. I didn't know it yet, but that was the first time I thought about going back into the system, not as a user, as a dev, as a reckoning. The morning after, I brewed coffee out of reflex, but let it sit until it went cold. The sunlight hit the blinds in perfect lines across my floor, as if even the daylight knew how to behave. I didn't. I sat there with my hands folded on the kitchen table, still and quiet, like a statue nobody bothered to dust. There was no grand collapse, no sobbing on the bathroom tiles, no cinematic unraveling, just emptiness. A vacuum in my chest where reactions should have been. I wasn't grieving, I was buffering. I opened the app, again and again. My thumb moved like it had its own neural drive, down, refresh, repeat. Caleb's profile stared back at me like a smirk frozen in amber. Highly compatible, it said. There was a new badge now, top-tier conversationalist. I stared at it too long. My coffee rippled slightly when I finally exhaled. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't even rage, not yet. What I felt was closer to noise, a low, droning hum beneath my skin, like someone had left a monitor on inside my skull. Static, cold, and consistent. I thought maybe I was losing it. I even searched the apartment for sound sources, checked the fridge, the outlet near my nightstand. But the noise wasn't coming from the outside, it was coming from me. I couldn't stop imagining him sending the same message to someone else. What makes you feel safe? I knew the cadence, knew the bait. The trap was efficient because it didn't look like a trap. It looked like understanding. That's what made it lethal. I had spent most of my life believing in systems. I trusted things with clean UI and privacy disclaimers. I had coded back-end protections for patient databases and biometric consent apps. I once testified against an internal contractor who embedded a social tracking loop into a meditation app's analytics. I believed in clean code the way some people believed in saints, until that trial, until they threw out the case on unproven intent, until I became the ghost in someone else's corrupted machine. That was the last time I touched anything back-end. Until now. I don't remember deciding. My fingers just knew what to do. I re-downloaded my old dev shell, pulled up an anonymized sandbox, and began looking at the app's API access structure. It wasn't hidden. Not really, just buried behind enough jargon and shadow-banning syntax to keep non-engineers out. But I wasn't non-engineer. I was the ghost. I had always known how to haunt quietly. The more I unpacked, the clearer it became. This app didn't just match users. It built adaptive profiles. Each swipe was a data point, every message, an emotional fingerprint. Not just what you liked, but when you hesitated. How long your pause was before replying to a compliment. Whether you're heartbeat increased when you received a good morning text. They harvested micro-reactions, mined it like digital ore. And worse, they sold it. I found tags labeled emotional compliance rating, hidden, obscured. But there, a simple numeric score ranging from 0.2 to 1.0. I clicked mine, 0.93. Users above 0.8 demonstrate statistically significant patterns of agreeable behavior following mild psychological pressure. These users respond positively to authoritative phrasing, vulnerability scripts, and escalated intimacy timelines. The bile that rose in my throat was slow, bitter. I swallowed it dry. I wasn't a person to them. I was a conversion metric, a prime match for users flagged with assertive dependence composite traits. Caleb wasn't a bug in their system. He was exactly who the system was built to serve. My chest went tight. A memory surfaced. Uninvited. Seamless. Him brushing a hair from my face. "You feel familiar?" Me laughing. Nervous. "Maybe I just look like someone you hurt." And his answer? "No. Someone I trust." God. I'd fed him the script. I wrote my own prison line by line. I stared at the screen, at my compliance rating, at the buried folder of behavior analytics tied to my ID hash. I could barely blink. I couldn't cry. Not yet. But I could read, could trace the path backward. My hands hovered over the keyboard like they were waiting for permission. I gave it to them. I dove deeper. I found system call logs, mapping histories, trigger response simulations. It was all there. The kind of digital psychopathy that only becomes visible when you know what you're looking for. What broke me wasn't the assault, not fully. It was discovering that it had been predicted, that someone, somewhere, had anticipated my reaction and tagged it as passively resolved. They didn't code a dating app, they coded compliance farming. I pushed back from my desk, chest heaving like I'd run miles. The apartment was dark now. Time had folded. My mouth was dry, my eyes burned. The static inside me sharpened into clarity. I didn't want justice. I wanted access. I whispered it out loud, just to hear myself say something true. There were legal channels. I could have reported the app, flagged the exploit, sent a tip-off to the right tech journalist. But I'd done that once. It hadn't worked. And even if it did, what would they do? Push out a patch? Update the UI? Add a new toggle labeled "Do Not Match with Monsters"? No. This wasn't a system you fixed. This was a system you infected. A new thought bloomed quietly in the background, like code compiling in a cold room. Not vengeance, not even resistance. Something purer. Symmetry. If they could build something to target women like me, maybe I could build something to target them back. Not with fire, not with lawsuits, but with mirrors, with echoes. I turned back to the monitor, opened a new directory. Somewhere in that code was a way to make him remember. Every word, every breath, every silence he pretended not to hear. And if not him, then every man like him. Because static doesn't scream. It builds, until the signal can't be ignored anymore. The thing about predators like Caleb is that they're never satisfied with one. They call it connection, they call it chemistry. But what they're really chasing is replication. They want the same script over and over, different actresses, same monologue. So I decided to audit the performance history. I pulled the source logs through an unauthorized backdoor left open by a lazy dev A, and ran a series of timestamp queries, matched geotags to review entries, overlaid facial vectors against public metadata. It didn't take long. Predators are efficient because the system helps them be. 6 women. Different names. Same trail. 3 had rated him 5 stars. 2 had left no review. 1 had deleted her account entirely. But in the back end, nothing really disappears. Their emotional compliance scores were all within the same threshold. Their trauma lexicon usage? Aligned. Their profile progression rate after initial conversation? Mirror matches. Caleb hadn't found us. He had been delivered to us. I stared at the data. Rows of dates, emotional tags, sentiment scans, compiled word clouds. It felt less like a pattern and more like a signature, a sickness that replicated itself through code instead of contact. His words weren't spontaneous, they were behavioral scripts. I remembered mine. "You feel familiar." A chill ran through me. I started building a file. Not for a trial, not for the police, but for precision, for symmetry. I labeled it like a case study. Each woman had a profile. Time, interaction style, AI-predicted vulnerability score. I stripped away names, left only patterns. I thought it would help to dehumanize it, to stay clinical, but somewhere between timestamp 45 and 46, my throat closed. "You aren't crazy, you were processed." I needed confirmation, not from the app, from them, the women behind the rows. I moved to forums, burned my IP, created a pseudonym and a shell profile. I'd done it before, for work, for whistleblowing, for protection. But this time I wasn't looking for justice, I was looking for resonance. Encrypted trauma threads, invitation-only chat rooms, places where women gathered not to cry, but to map their pain like cartographers of suffering. I typed carefully. My hands hovered before I hit send. Then I wrote the question. "Did he call you safe, too?" The first two blocked me. Fast, defensive, maybe scared. Maybe they'd buried it so deep they couldn't look. I didn't blame them. One responded with legal threats, said she had a restraining order against Caleb already, and if I contacted her again, she'd add me to the paperwork. That part didn't sting. What did sting was that she assumed I was just another woman obsessed with him, another flame still burning for his approval. But then, one replied, then another, then a third. The messages weren't frantic. They weren't loud, just steady, contained. The first one. He asked me what scent I missed from childhood, said it told him everything about my nervous system. The second. He said I made him feel like he could finally exhale. The third. He liked calling me his calm, said I helped him forget how hard the world had been to him. And then this, from one of them. He used my trauma vocabulary like it was part of foreplay. I felt my hand shake slightly, not from fear, from confirmation. We were blueprints, we were test groups, we were iterations. We didn't scream, we didn't spiral, we didn't trauma bond. We opened a private channel, we uploaded logs, we compared his phrases, his gestures, his emotional mirror game. We highlighted time overlaps. It turned out two of us had dated him within the same month. He told us both we reminded him of his sister. I don't think he even has a sister. We didn't talk like victims. We talked like devs in a breach meeting. What failed? Where? How often? How deep? Sarah ran system diagrams for predictive consent pressure. Rena compiled an emotional keyword heat map. Mira, who worked in UX, broke down Caleb's most common text reply sequences and their neural pattern equivalent in grooming behavior. None of us cried. Not because we didn't hurt, but because the pain had already fossilized. We weren't bleeding. We were etching. We named the folder Echo 0.0. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about mapping the silence we'd been forced to live inside. Together. For the first time, the static in my bones had shape, had rhythm. I remember staring at the screen late one night, watching our synced logs flicker back and forth across the screen like some kind of collective heart monitor. This wasn't friendship. It wasn't healing. It was data intimacy. Shared wound translated into structured knowledge, the kind of clarity that doesn't ask for tears, it asks for action. And as I sat there, shoulder hunched under a lamp's yellow wash, cursor blinking next to his name, I realized silence wasn't absence. It was the blueprint. He built his patterns in our silences. In the places we didn't fight, didn't yell, didn't report. He trusted the world to flatten our memories, to file them under misunderstanding or mixed signals. But now we had memory in code, not as evidence, but as weapon. I looked at his photo again, the same profile, the same bookstore, that same gentle tilt of the head designed to make you feel like you could tell him anything. I didn't feel scared anymore. I felt calibrated. We didn't need to scream. We had each other's confirmation, and soon he would have our memory. The silence was over. It was time to echo. We didn't want him dead. That would have been too simple, too immediate, too clean. Death is silence, and silence had already failed us. What we wanted was duration. We wanted memory to stretch, to wrap around him like wire, unseen but slicing. Every pause, every no, every calculated smile he crafted with the precision of a manipulator rehearsing his next masterpiece. We wanted it looped, replayed, echoed until it collapsed in on itself. Blood would have been merciful. We wanted permanence. The question wasn't, how do we punish him? It was, how do we make sure he can never pretend it didn't happen? And in that space, between vengeance and proof, we found our method. Or maybe it found us. There was a file I remembered from years ago, buried deep inside a failed emotional intelligence module I once beta tested for a neurotherapy app. It had been designed for couples' empathy bonding, something soft, marketable, full of ethical disclaimers. A loop of shared memory immersion through biofeedback sync designed to trigger mutual catharsis. They called it neural compassion mapping. I called it poorly encrypted. The company shelved it after 2 lawsuits and a minor seizure incident, but the architecture remained, and so did my access. I pulled the source code from an archived backup and fed it into a protected shell. The kernel was intact. I studied the neural bridge protocol line by line. The problem wasn't stability, it was restriction. The system had been designed to cap shared emotion at mild intensity, designed for healing. All I had to do was remove the governors, remove the filters, and invert the direction. It wasn't about pain, it was about context, about forcing the predator to sit in the cage he built, except the bars would be made of us. I called it the loop. Not poetic, maybe, but honest. It wasn't meant to teach him anything, it was meant to confront, not with lecture, res, or ghostly metaphors, but with sequence, timeline, immersion. The mind doesn't fracture from pain, it fractures from continuity, from being unable to deny the pattern forming in front of it. The others joined me in silence. We didn't need to speak. They logged in, uploaded their fragments, some sent recordings, others submitted descriptions of physical sensation, muscle memory, scent-based triggers. Every moment he took from us, reconstructed. Not for drama, for impact calibration. Sarah submitted hers first. The way he put the wine glass in my hand, like it was a gift, like it had weight. I remember thinking he touched the glass longer than he should have. I wrote that down, time-stamped it, matched it with my own. Rena sent a sound file. This was the music he played when I started crying, a soft, looping guitar track. It made me feel like I was being erased gently. I integrated it into the loop's ambient layer. Mira's fragment was the worst. A whisper, just a single line. You're not like the others. You're calm. You listen. He had said that to me too, almost word for word. I nearly choked when I read it. We didn't delete our pain. We uploaded it. That was the rule. No edits, no cuts, no reframing. We weren't curating trauma for clarity. We were feeding it to the algorithm raw, messy, alive. I designed the loop to run on a pressure-triggered emotional threshold. It would begin softly, a scent, a flicker of light, a cadence of speech, and then it would escalate. Every memory tethered to the next. Every violation whispered in his own voice, reflected back at him, not as accusation, but echo. There would be no blood, no screams, just the cold realization of sequence. That was me. That was me again. That was me, wasn't it? I coded alone. Nights ran into mornings. My eyes burned constantly. My wrists ached. But I had never felt more present, more capable. Not righteous, relevant. There was no glory in this. Only clarity. Vengeance. This intimate can't be cinematic. It has to be surgical, precise. Once the loop was ready, I built the interface. A wearable device disguised as a neural relaxation patch, standard for high-tier app users seeking deep restorative bonding. We would offer it to him through a fake pilot program, a healing retreat designed for emotional transparency in elite matches, all consensual, all documented. We forged the paperwork. We masked the server. We created a front-end page that mirrored the app's real UI. When he logged in, he wouldn't know the difference. He'd think he was being rewarded. And in a way, he was. He'd be the first to experience true feedback. Rehearsed the final lines of the confirmation message, not from malice, from symmetry. You've been selected for an exclusive neural feedback beta designed to strengthen empathy, accountability, and emotional memory. Your healing begins now. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like justice finally wore the right skin. I paused the cursor, let the room go still. Somewhere, Caleb was probably laughing at another rooftop bar, pouring another glass of wine, asking some girl what made her feel safe. He wouldn't be laughing much longer, because tomorrow he'd put on a device that would mirror back every inch of himself. And this time, we wouldn't flinch. We didn't have to chase him. That was the part that chilled me more than anything. The trap didn't need bait. The system was the bait. The interface. The lighting. The language. Caleb walked into it like it was a homecoming. No hesitation. No suspicion. Just his signature grin stretched across the same smug face I had once mistaken for softness. The app sent him the invitation exactly as we'd designed it. Neutral color scheme, elegant phrasing, a balance of professionalism and intimacy. Congratulations, Caleb. You've been selected for the Empathic Integrity Program, an exclusive retreat for high-tier users ready to deepen emotional bonds and neural transparency. All costs covered. All outcomes are confidential. He didn't even blink. Predators trust systems that always worked for them. The facility we rented looked like something out of a wellness startup's fever dream. Minimalist design, moss walls, ambient lighting in shades of dusk and candlelight, soothing tones piped through the walls, staff in pale beige uniforms, neutral enough to erase accountability, curated enough to feel high-end. There was even a mock sign-in kiosk with a screen prompt, "Your clarity begins now." He arrived early. Of course he did. I watched from the surveillance feed as he entered the atrium with his phone in one hand and a cup of herbal tea he probably hadn't paid for in the other. His body language was relaxed, even cocky. He leaned against the reception desk and smiled at the intake nurse like this was his reward for surviving all the crazy ones. I'd seen that smile before. It was the same one he gave me when I told him I didn't want another drink. The same one he wore while brushing my hair back like he was writing a scene he'd already rehearsed. He signed the NDA without reading it. Just a lazy flick of the pen. When asked about allergies, he said, "Only guilt." He looked at the headset like it was a trophy. It was matte white, sleek, minimal nodes lined with thin gold tracers that wrapped around the base of the skull. A marvel of subtle control. He lifted it gently, reverently, like he was unboxing luxury tech. One of our fake facilitators, Rena, masked and silent, helped secure it in place. He didn't even flinch. "I've always wanted to try one of these. I heard it's like therapy without the therapist," he chuckled. "Just the mirror, right?" I almost laughed. I sat behind reinforced glass in a sealed observation room, monitors flickering in front of me. His vitals, emotional sync readings, biometric response spikes. My heart rate didn't change. I had learned over time to compress emotion into action. What I felt now wasn't adrenaline. It was inevitability, like watching a train slide perfectly onto a track you built from memory. He signs the form, he jokes with the tech, then the link activates. His smile freezes. The moment the sequence began, everything shifted. Not visibly, not with force, but with texture. The air thickened, his pupils dilated. The first memory was subtle, a flicker of candlelight, the clink of a wine glass, the ghost of a phrase he used too often. "You feel familiar." He blinked, said nothing. The interface didn't speak to him in words. That was the design. It spoke in familiarity. It layered his consciousness with repetition. Sounds he couldn't place. Objects he didn't remember knocking over. The scent of someone's shampoo. The temperature of a couch cushion he didn't recall pressing someone into. And for the first time, he couldn't look away. We watched as his vitals began to shift. The loop's intensity was still at level 1, barely a whisper, but his skin reacted first. Slight sweat rise, a subtle tightening of his jaw. His hands flexed but didn't clench. The mind resists long before it understands. I glanced at the other screens. Sarah's feed was steady. Mira's breath had slowed into something close to ritual. We were synced in but distant, observers of our own reconstruction. "He's trying to rationalize it," Mira whispered through the comms. "Let him," I replied. "Rationalization is the gateway to memory." Then came the second loop. It was Rena's memory this time, the music. That damned guitar track he played while she cried in silence. The notes unraveled like smoke from invisible speakers. His hands twitched. His brows drew inward. A crease formed between his eyes, the kind you make when you walk into a room that feels wrong, but you can't say why. He reached for the headset as if to adjust it, but the moment his fingers brushed the surface, the loop locked in. Skin response engaged. Muscles stiffened. A slight jolt to the base of the skull. Harmless, but unignorable. The screen read, Phase 2, Engagement, Full Sensory Resonance. And then the memories began folding. Not cinematic, not staged, just experienced, sequentially, accurately, without permission. He heard himself say, "You're safe here." He felt the hesitation in our bodies. He touched the pillow, the perfume bottle, the back of a knee trembling beneath compliant silence. His breathing stuttered. The smile was gone now, replaced by something raw, confused. Not guilt, not yet. Just misalignment. Like someone forced to watch a play he doesn't remember starring in. "Vitals spiking," Rena said. "Hold the sequence," I answered. "He hasn't seen it all yet." The loop was only on memory 3. The twist wasn't the content. It was the recognition. The way repetition cracked his certainty, his phrases, once charming, now indictments, the environment, once curated for seduction, now sterilized for examination, the same sentences across too many faces. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but he couldn't form the words, because for the first time, he wasn't the narrator. He was the subject, and we were the lens. It didn't break him with blood. That would have been too clear, too physical. He didn't see knives or screams or bruises blossoming across skin, no cinematic reckoning, no montage of horror to cue guilt. That's not how memory undoes a man like Caleb. It starts with the seams, with the dissonance, with the barely there but undeniable feeling that something, everything, is misaligned. It started with the pillow, not one from his apartment, from Sarah's. The way she gripped the edge of it too hard, fingers curled in as if trying to hold on to herself. The memory wasn't visual, it was textural. He felt her tension in his fingertips, the same hands he used to straighten the fabric afterward, as if smoothing the bed meant smoothing the moment. Then came the mascara. Not running, not dramatic. Just slightly smeared, like Rena had rubbed at her eye while lying on her side, blinking at the crack in his ceiling. The same ceiling I had stared at too, counting lines to stay present, to stay separate. The memories weren't chronological, they weren't theatrical, they were intimate. He met his own lines like strangers in a crowd. The loop showed him what it felt like to be watched while shrinking, not through horror, but through habit. Every paused breath, every half-formed no. The door that didn't click shut fast enough, the hesitation in a joke, the way Mira's laughter froze when he touched her jaw mid-sentence. He saw the hesitation, but worse, he saw the script. The loop had indexed his words, his gestures. Every time he whispered, "You're safe," it returned, overlaying his tone with our internal readouts. Our stress spikes, our freezing vitals, our compliance. And then the faces started appearing. First, mine, then Sarah, then Rena, then one he couldn't name, someone whose profile he likely swiped past without remembering. But she remembered him. He blinked hard, shook his head like it might clear the fog, but the loop didn't give him time. The memories weren't fed to him, they grew around him, vine-like, slow, rooted, and suffocating. "Was that me?" he whispered. "Was that me?" It wasn't a scream, not yet. Just confusion. A child lost in a house he built himself. But the more he tried to understand, the more it hurt. Not his body, his rhythm, his confidence. The sequence no longer made sense. He started pacing inside the chamber, breath uneven, shoulders tightening. I watched from the observation bay, fingers lightly pressed against the glass. He tried to break the pattern, forced a smile, spoke aloud. "This isn't real, it's not real, this is some kind of..." But the loop didn't respond to denial. It responded to resonance, and the memories were answered with evidence. Every woman, every silence, every passive nod that had once given him permission now confronted him in stereo. By hour 9, he vomited. Not because he felt guilty, but because his system couldn't regulate anymore. The brain was trying to form a single, cohesive story from fragments of contradiction. But predators like Caleb live on compartmentalization. The loop made that impossible. It didn't accuse him. It confirmed him. By hour 12, he started sobbing. Ugly. Wet. Collapsing sobs that came from someplace deeper than awareness. Not grief. Not even guilt. Overload. His nervous system short-circuited under the weight of all the women he'd taught himself to forget. "Was I always like that?" he muttered. Did I mean it?" And then again, louder. "Was that me? Tell me it wasn't me." But no one answered. Because this wasn't about us telling him what he did. It was about him realizing it. He reached for the headset again, nails clawing against the sleek edge like it might unlatch if he begged hard enough. His breathing hitched. His legs buckled once, then again. His blood pressure spiked. He gasped, as if the air inside the loop was thinner than he remembered. He screamed once. Not a word, just raw sound, the sound of a man choking on mirrors. I watched him try to disconnect. The device. I saw his fingers struggle to find the seam. There wasn't one. But the loop had roots now. Neural, emotional, moral. Confession was the only kill switch. I had written it into the code deliberately. His only exit condition was verbal admission of sequence. Not apology, no regret, just acknowledgement. Of timeline, of repetition, of himself. Mira leaned forward near the monitor. Her voice was calm. "Do you think he knows yet?" I answered without looking away. "Not yet. But he can't look at himself the same way again. That's where it begins." Somewhere behind me, the system logged a spike in neural activity, mirror neuron saturation reaching threshold. He was no longer processing our memories as ours. He had begun experiencing them as if they were his own, not out of empathy, but proximity. That's what the loop did. It blurred ownership. Until guilt wasn't performative, it was inherited. And still, he hadn't confessed, not out loud, but he was close. I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the boy who called himself a man, now curled on the floor of a room that only reflected. He wasn't screaming anymore, but he was listening. And the loop wasn't done. The headset came off, but the loop didn't end. That was the first thing he didn't understand. He clawed at it in hour 13, and when it finally gave way, when the machine unclasped from the base of his skull and dropped to the floor like a discarded crown, he expected silence, expected stillness. But the loop wasn't in the hardware anymore. It had moved inward, mapped itself along his neural pathways like roots through floorboards. It didn't need wires now. It was him. He ran first, out of the room, down the hall. Security didn't stop him. There was no point. We'd already erased the exit codes. The building was clean, sterile, untraceable. But the memories followed, not like hallucinations, like shadows. They clung to his breath, replayed behind his eyes when he blinked. The phrases he once used to seduce now hissed in his ears like accusations. "You're not like the others. You make me feel calm. You're safe here." He called a lawyer 2 days later, not the one he used for real estate or taxes, someone high profile, crisis management. We watched him sit in a glass office, twisting his hands while trying to explain that he'd been neuro-assaulted through a matchmaking platform. He didn't even have the language to describe what happened. And when the lawyer asked what module he'd consented to, he stuttered. He pulled up the contract, read the words, scanned for violation. "You signed full psychological immersion consent," the lawyer said, eyes narrowing. You waived recall rights. But this wasn't normal. And yet, the man said, standing, you walked into the fire and asked it to heal you. The lawyer didn't just decline the case. He left the room without shaking Caleb's hand. So he sued the app. He sent formal notices, threatened litigation, demanded data logs, press releases, warnings. The app's legal team responded in exactly 39 hours with a line so RP, it could have been poetry. We do not recognize the technology described in your complaint as belonging to our system. He pushed further, tracked down the CEO. And when he finally sat across from him, white walls, an untouched bottle of sparkling water between them, he got a sentence that rang louder than anything else. We didn't build this module. And for once, a man in a boardroom was telling the truth. Because I had. The loop wasn't a product. It was an interruption, an infection, a reckoning. That was when he stopped running. The first confession happened by accident. A church, half empty. Caleb sat near the back like a ghost trying to pretend he still had skin. The priest wasn't expecting a full testimony, but he got one. I think I broke people, Caleb said, eyes downcast. I didn't mean to, but I remember faces, things I said, things I felt while they froze. Why didn't they say anything? The priest didn't offer absolution. He just listened. And that was enough for the loop to pause. A flicker, a skipped heartbeat. That was the key. Truth wasn't redemption. It was a tax, and he paid it in syllables. After that, the confessions came more frequently. Not to us. We never spoke to him again. He didn't know our names. Not really. But he felt us. And he tried to exorcise us with a speech. To a friend, I thought I was helping them heal. To a barista, I remember her mascara. I remember not caring. To a stranger in a subway, I didn't stop. And I think she froze because of me. He wasn't seeking forgiveness. He was seeking release. The loop didn't demand remorse. It demanded recognition. It asked for him to admit the pattern. And every time he spoke the truth, just a sliver, just one frame of the full reel, the volume lowered. Not gone, just softened, like a car alarm slowing its shriek into a hum. We monitored him, not because we wanted to interfere, but because we needed to know whether the sequence was holding. It was. His vitals stabilized for the first time in days. His resting pulse dropped. The night terrors slowed from 5 per night to 2. He stopped throwing up at random. He began sleeping in his own bed again. But he never smiled the same. He didn't date. He didn't log back into the app. And we never reached out. That was the part no one ever understood. We didn't want to watch him suffer. We wanted him to know, to feel, to be accountable. And once he began paying that cost with his own breath, we stepped back. We lowered the signal, slightly. I remember the moment I turned the dial. Just one tick left, not out of mercy, out of completion. He had said, "Was that me?" And that was enough. I shut the server feed. The screen went dark. Outside, the world went on. The app launched a new feature, real-time mood matching. They marketed it with words like consent-forward AI and compassion verification. I almost laughed, as if any of it had changed, as if ethics could be patched in like a bug fix. But somewhere, deep in the back end, a loop still spun, a fail-safe, waiting, listening. And he still heard us, even in silence. Because once you see yourself in the mirror, you never forget the face that looked back. I vanished like I'd always planned to. No dramatics, no press release, no trail of breadcrumbs begging for credit. Just a silent logout, a remote server shift, and a final line of clean code rerouting the last heartbeat of the system I'd built. The apartment emptied in 2 days. I left behind the lamps, the dishes, the old coffee pot that still hissed when touched, everything I no longer needed. It felt like shedding skin, not leaving a home. I didn't tell the others. They didn't ask. We understood each other now through absence more than presence. That was the power of what we'd done. We hadn't created a hero's journey, we'd created a mirror. And once someone finally sees what they've always been, they either destroy the reflection or they live with it. The loop still ran. I made sure of that. Quiet, subtle, non-invasive at first. It sat in the back end of the app like a dormant virus, waiting not for activation, but for alignment. It only triggered when the patterns repeated. The phrasing, the pressure, the predation that wore a therapist's tone. That's when it mirrored back, when it matched. They thought we were victims, I suppose, that we would break, or at best, survive with scars. But scars are maps, and maps can be copied, circulated, traced by other hands. I'd started hearing stories, not directly, just fragments, rumors whispered in digital corners. A man in Chicago who started shaking uncontrollably after a third date with a girl he met through the app. Another in Oslo who withdrew from work, claiming he couldn't stop dreaming of eyes that didn't blink. Patterns, echoes. One woman posted anonymously, "I didn't say anything, I didn't cry, I just slipped him the patch before dinner. He smiled. The loop took care of the rest." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. It was never mine to own. I wasn't the architect of justice. I wasn't some mythic avenger wielding vengeance like a blade. I was something quieter, more dangerous in its patience. I wasn't the hero, just the bond, the interface, the echo. And I had never been more certain of who I was. There was a moment, days after I left, when I found myself at a small roadside cafe, the kind with rain-streaked windows and chipped teacups that still smelled faintly of lavender. I sat alone in the corner, phone face down, laptop closed, hands wrapped around a mug too warm to hold. Outside, a couple laughed under a shared umbrella. Something about the way the woman tilted her head, guarded but smiling, made my chest ache. I used to smile like that, used to lean in just enough without falling. But even then, I never fully felt seen. I picked up the phone, opened the app, just once, out of curiosity. The loading screen pulsed softly, still that same heartbeat rhythm, still that tagline. "We don't find you dates, we find your fate." It felt different now, not because the words had changed, but because I had. Once, that screen had offered me a future, a hope disguised in algorithms, a lie dressed in UX. Now it was a warning, a siren for the naive and the trusting, but it was also a gateway, one that led back, not forward, into reckoning, into memory, into truth. I didn't swipe, didn't search. I just watched the screen glow for a few moments longer, then closed it gently. Somewhere, I imagined, another woman was coding, quietly, fiercely, out of her own rupture. Maybe she'd never heard of me, maybe she'd never need to. That was the beauty of a system built on silence. We didn't need applause. We needed continuity. The app would keep updating, new versions, new interfaces. The company would promise transparency, maybe even create an empathy pledge. But none of that mattered. Because somewhere in the back end, deep inside the archive where abandoned scripts go to rot, the loop still existed, masked, undetectable, but listening. And if the right sequence triggered, if the words aligned again, if another Caleb whispered, "You feel familiar," to someone who had already learned to remember herself, then the loop would begin again. No warning, just reflection, just fate folding in on itself. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I walked out of the cafe before the tea cooled. No destination, no closure, just the weightless knowing that I was no longer prey, no longer proof, just possibility. And somewhere deep in the network, fate finally starts remembering us back. We built this story on a truth too many carry alone, that survival doesn't always come with a courtroom ending. Sometimes it comes coded in quiet revenge, in reclaimed memory, in collective reflection. The lesson? Justice doesn't always arrive loudly, but it always leaves echoes. So here's the question only you can answer. If the systems around us are still matching harm, how do you rewrite the loop? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for stories that speak the truths no one else dares to script. Wait. Comment, stay aware, you're not alone in the code.